Hello, everyone. Welcome to the new episode of Grounded in Groundshot podcast with the Busy Lab. I'm very happy to welcome you back again. Today, our guest is a super special person, a person very, very close to my heart. I respect her a lot. She's one of my role models, icons of inspiration. She has influenced clinical trials all over the world, and any number of praise that I give her would be less compared to what she has done for the oncology world. It's my big pleasure to welcome her. Many people will know her. She needs no introduction, but just for the sake of introducing, she's Professor Elizabeth Eisenhauer. She is a professor emeriti of Queen's University in Kingston, Canada, where I have the privilege of working. She did her MD in 1976 from Queen's University, followed by internal medicine and hematology fellowships. And she served for many years as the director of the Investigational New Drug Program at the CCTG, the Canadian Cancer Trial Group, where she led and oversaw more than 170 clinical trials. Even more importantly, she led the development and the revision of the RECIST criteria that we always use for measuring tumor response in clinical trials. She was the lead author on the 2009 key paper of RECIST 1.1. At Queen's University, she also served as professor and head of the Department of Oncology from 2012 to 2017. I keep saying this, that one of my regrets of joining Queen's Oncology was I joined after she had retired from the department head position at Queen's. I joined Queen's in 2019. And I always wonder what it would have felt like to work under her leadership, because she's such an amazing person, which you'll get to know more as we talk today. Her accolades are, it's beyond what we can list here. She has a Wikipedia page. You can check out her Wikipedia page as well. But again, just to list a few, she has been inducted into the Officer of the Order of Canada in 2017. She received the prestigious Canada Gardner Whitman Award in 2021, and so on. So without much further ado, let's welcome Professor Elizabeth Eisenhauer today to the podcast. So as I gave a brief introduction earlier, now we have Professor Elizabeth Eisenhauer with us for the podcast today. Thank you so much for making time.
You're very welcome.
And I think the audience will know that more than any professional achievements, I respect both mentees, mentors, colleagues for what they are as a human being. And Elizabeth has always been a role model, an icon of inspiration. So it is actually my biggest pleasure to have her in the podcast today. And I remember Elizabeth as, personally for me, even before you came, I had recorded a brief prelude to this. One of my regrets about joining Queen's was that I joined Queen's after you left.
Oh, right.
So yeah. I have always wondered what it would feel like to work with you, under your leadership, for you. So that is one of my regrets, that I joined Queen's a little late after you had already retired. But you never let me feel like you have been retired. You have always offered me mentorship. You have always offered me advice when I needed it. And especially, I remember that the very first night I came to Kingston, and at the time, as I mentioned, you were not even the department head. Like, you had no formal obligation towards me, but you invited us for dinner. You said that this is your first night in Kingston. You would probably not even have a freeze. You don't know where to do groceries, blah, blah, blah. Just come over at my place and we'll have dinner together. And that meant a lot because, I felt very nostalgic. I missed my mom. I have moved different countries, and I always miss my parents. I have left, so to speak, the lap of my parents since 2017. No, 2012. Since 2012, and I have never been back to my parents since then. I have been in different places. But when you invited me for dinner that very first night in Kingston, without you even knowing us well, and the love and care you showed to us, my family, and you have always been showing that. We bought our first house. You were the first person to come to our place and give us with that gift of rhododendron, which is our national flower.
Yes, the Nepalese flower.
Yes, and I got the first faculty job you were the first person to give me a card and congratulate me. We had our second child in Kingston. You were there, and honestly, like nobody else in Kingston has been there
Mm.
for all of these milestones. And you didn't have to, but you did, and that what makes me feel very, very special. And I have respected you a long, long time. I have read your papers in a professional capacity, but I really respect you for what you are as a human being. And I never had this opportunity to tell you this
Oh,
in person
that's
as
really
well.
good of you.
So let's begin with that. So thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
everything that you have done.
Well, I sort of think the secret to making professional colleagues as successful as possible is to embrace them as if they're family. I've always felt that. And as you know, families have their ups and downs. No two families are the same, but having that feeling that you matter, your success matters to the people around you, to the parent figures, to your mentors, is really important, and that you're valued not just as someone who can come and add scholarship to a place, but who can add personality and meaning to a place is important to me.
Yeah, and we all know about your amazing baking
Oh,
skills
yes.
and
Well,
how.
when I was department head in oncology for 5 years, we had, as all departments do, we had departmental meetings once a month at lunchtime, and we had them catered from a nice delicatessen here in town. And at the time, funding was a little bit tight for extraneous things like food at department meetings. And so I was looking at these bills and I thought, they're charging like $9 a person for a piece of brownie
Oh,
for
wow.
dessert. And I thought, oh, I
Yeah.
can do that for free. So we started a bit of a tradition that I would bring desserts to the department meeting. I'm hoping it made people want to come more
Did
than not.
did you do a pre-post analysis?
No, we did not. We did not. We did not. But it was kind of fun to do that. And it also was kind of a personal way of thanking people. So
No, and I have seen you, take care of your grandkids. Uh, your daughter is our colleague here in palliative care,
yeah.
and your other daughter is a nurse who is also a PhD.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Danielle, my older daughter, is palliative care physician
yeah,
here, head of the division, or co-head of the division. And my younger daughter, Nicole, first did a nursing degree, then did an MPA, a Master's of Public Admin, and then did a PhD in Public Health Sciences. But she's now Director of Analytics, Innovation, and Research at the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Alberta.
Okay, wow. So you must be very proud of
Yes,
your
proud of
family.
both of
Yeah,
them.
and you have lovely grandkids
Yeah.
who adore you.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, I have a grandson, Gabriel, who's 14 going on 40, as best I can tell, in terms of his maturity, and a younger granddaughter, Tess, who's just 8.
Yeah, no, she goes to singing classes together with my daughter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're both in the
yeah.
choir.
And I tell Danielle how lucky she is that you are around.
Yes,
Yeah,
I think it is such a privilege in this day and age to have your adult children and their children close by, because so many families, as
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
are spread around the globe.
Hmm.
And that is not something we evolved to expect. I mean, family groups were kind of the core of, historically, the core of human culture, right? Family
Indeed,
groups and
indeed.
extended family
Yeah,
groups. And now that we can travel so easily, and now that the world is, in a way, a village, people do spread, and then it becomes
true.
challenging to see them. I was thinking of that, especially for you during the pandemic when travel was so restricted, and you would naturally be worried if someone got sick the other side
Yeah,
of the globe. What could you do?
yeah,
Just
indeed.
terrible,
That
terribly
was my biggest
challenging.
concern. My mom was not doing very well, and yeah, my biggest worry was even if I hear any unpleasant news, I can't just take a plane and be there tomorrow.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, we took that for granted.
yeah.
It
Indeed.
was,
Which actually brings me to another topic I wanted to ask you about these travels. As if, like when you were in your prime career, you were also raising family, And for, I think about myself or our other colleagues, we travel so often. I don't know, like, did you also travel very often?
Uh,
And how did you manage that responsibility? It must be more difficult for a mom.
um, yes and no. I think it depends a large degree on your partner and the social and physical supports you have. So we always had, until the children were probably 10 and 12 or 11 and 13, we had babysitters for the first few years. They lived in our house. And thereafter, they would come every morning at 7:45 to help get the kids ready for school, pick them up after school. And my husband, Brian, was always very supportive of what I did. But on the trade-off, of course, was when I was working mostly in clinical research and had a very small clinical practice, that after the first few years, I wasn't on call. So I didn't have to spend weekends away on call. I might spend a weekend away at a meeting, but it was certainly doable with the supports we were fortunate enough to have.
Yeah, but yeah, during, like, even now we hear how it is difficult for women to get into oncology. There is a group called Women in Oncology. And of course, there are different challenges that women face that we males don't face. At your time, it must have been even more difficult. And how you forced your way into this field and made a name for yourself and transformed the world of oncology as a woman. Did you feel that you had some, I don't know how to put it, underprivileges, that you had to fight more than others?
No, I must say, get asked that question not infrequently. I was the first
Yeah.
female member of the Department of Medicine here. I was appointed in
Oh, really?
1982. And in medical school, I went to Queen's Medical School. We were 75 in the class and 13 women. So very different ratio than today. But I have to say, whether it was the peculiarities of me just being oblivious, or whether it was the fact that I was blessed with faculty and teachers who really didn't seem to discriminate, I never felt held back by being a woman in medicine. And the only challenge that I ever faced was when I was pregnant in my final year of internal medicine. So I did 3 years of internal medicine and then hematology training, because when I trained, there was no oncology fellowship in Canada. And I got pregnant I don't know, about a year before I finished my 5 years total time. And I went to speak to the program director to ask about maternity leave. And well, of course, no one had ever asked that before, because no one, and they actually didn't know what to do. So I said, well, I proposed a solution, which was that I take 3 months off, for which I would be paid. But then when I went back, I would work an extra 3 months at the end of the year, unpaid, and that worked. But it was enlightening that it hadn't been a problem that we faced before. And of course, there are now all sorts of supports and rules around being pregnant during your residency. But it was interesting. The residency program director he just didn't know what to do, because it was clear I couldn't just come back to work the next day after having a child, but that's what we did.
Yeah, and I think it's still the case in many countries in the world. They don't get these maternity leaves. I was surprised when I was allowed to take paternity leave. I did not even think
things
that.
in Canada have evolved a huge amount. I think we're not quite where some of the Scandinavian countries are in terms of paid leave. And the rules here are a little bit complicated, because you need to be employed for a certain amount of time before you can take leave. And then you have an obligation to return. And if not, I think you have to pay back some of what you did. But don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. But for sure, when first maternity leave came, and then after a few years, it's more parental leave. Fathers and mothers can both take leave and not lose their job and get paid for some of it, but not necessarily all of it, depending on the employer.
No, we'll talk about other major accomplishments you have done. But I wanted to ask now, do you have any regrets in your career? Or if there are many, do you have like your biggest regret?
That's a tough one. as many children, when I was growing up, I had lots of interests and activities. I did a lot of music. I took violin lessons, piano lessons. I was in 3 choirs at one point. I was in the youth orchestra in Ottawa.
Oh, wow.
And I was, when I first came to Queen's.
I never knew this about you,
Oh,
that
really?
you were
There
in
you go.
choir.
There you go.
I'd love to listen a second one.
When I first came to Queen's, I joined the Queen's University Orchestra, and then I joined the Kingston Symphony, and I took private violin lessons for a few years. And I still played piano, but violin was really what I did most of. And I even once, when I got invited to a meeting in Europe, an ESO course, European School of Oncology course, the organizer discovered that I played violin and Martine Picard played piano. So we were invited to play something for the faculty dinner. And that was, I have to tell you that the amount of nervousness you feel being, let's say, a discussant at ASCO in the plenary session, which I was, is nothing compared to playing violin. So we played the César Franck violin sonata, the final movement, Martine Picard and I, having had 2 rehearsals, one 6 months before when we were both in Amsterdam for a new drug meeting, and one the day before. So it was really nerve-wracking, but we pulled it off.
I'll tell Martin about this when I met her, because she's in the magnitude of clinical benefit scale group.
Yes,
So we meet.
that was her baby, actually. And I was so relieved after this that I'd made it through and that it sounded okay. People seemed to like it. That on my taxi ride back to the hotel in Amsterdam, I forgot my violin in the boot, in the boot of the taxi, and panic descended. And I thought, what am I going to do? Because this was a 250-year-old violin that had come from New York City via my teacher, and I loved it. And I thought, what will my husband say that I've lost my violin? And then I thought, well, I'm in Amsterdam. I'm sure I could buy a new violin and bring it home. But then just as I was working through all of these solutions, the taxi returned, having remembered, he put something in the boot and in the trunk. And it was all okay. Yeah,
that's a very fascinating
So
story.
what you started out by saying, what are my regrets? My regrets are, as time went on and I got busier and busier, I had to sort of eliminate all of these sort of extracurricular activities. And I kind of regret that. I'm not sure how else what could have been done differently to manage them, because between the family, which was busy, the extracurricular activities of my kids, which were busy, and the work and the travel, which were busy, it just became too challenging to try to fit in rehearsals for symphony concerts or other things. So I regret that a bit. I also felt one of the good things about music for me was it was a complete break from what I did on a daily basis. It wasn't about seeing patients in clinic who were ill or dying. It wasn't about struggling about where we're going to get funding for the clinical trial we were working on. It was a complete break, and there's a real rush of endorphin when you play music and make music. So it was
you can
good
forget everything else and just be.
You're in the moment. You're in the moment, sort of like baking and gardening.
Exactly. And did you play any sports, Elizabeth?
I didn't. I was quite sick with asthma as a child. I was in hospital multiple times as a child with asthma. Yeah. And running made me wheeze. The only thing I could do was swim. So I did a lot of swimming. And then, of course, the medications for asthma changed, and that helped. Although when I was a resident, I became very ill, and I think I was an R3. Yeah, I was an R3, and I got a URI at a time of year when the pollen was high. So I was already a bit short of breath. Anyway, long and short, I ended up on a ventilator in ICU.
Oh, wow.
So that's why I wear a mask a lot these days when I'm in public, because I've got lungs that are not happy when they get sick.
Oh, we are very grateful.
I'm glad I came through the other side of that. That was a really interesting experience, because of course they paralyze you.
Yeah. How
I was
young?
27. I was 27.
Okay. So you have
26.
So you have very like
very
vivid
clear
memory.
memories of
Yeah.
it. Yeah. No, I remember thinking, like I was an R3 and I knew I was short of
Yeah.
breath, and I was making dinner for my sisters, who were Queen students at the time. It was Sunday, and thinking, oh, I'm so short of breath. I just need to sit down. I can't really walk from the living room to the to the kitchen. And I was sitting down and I said to Brian, I think I might pass out. I better go to the hospital. Anyway, in those days, they didn't have O2 sats. They did arterial pokes, blood gases.
Wow.
And they put me immediately on 40% oxygen, and my PO2 was 27
Yikes.
on 40% oxygen. So within hours, they couldn't get it above 50, and they said, we'll have to intubate you. So that was,
No,
it was very scary.
I had no idea
Oh,
you
yeah.
have the experience of having been intubated. I have
I
not
do.
met too many people.
Oh, and yeah. And it was my first experience of a clinical trial. I got randomized to a trial when I was in ICU.
Really? Of
Yeah,
what?
it was at a time when there were a lot of patients who had upper gastrointestinal bleeds from the stress of just being in and whatever else was going on. So they were doing a randomized trial comparing placebo to cimetidine as a way of preventing bleeds.
See.
I have no idea what I got. I didn't
Okay.
have a
Was it
bleed.
positive trial?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I never.
But was it the inspiration for you to
No,
lead clinical trials?
no,
Okay.
no.
So what was your inspiration? How did you end up being a clinical trialist and the most important clinical trialist of Canada?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. So, uh, again, a little personal history. Just before I started university, I started young at 16. My mom died of breast cancer, and she had
Before you
been,
started university.
yeah, it was the second month I was a student. So I was 16 and my younger sisters were 14 and 11. And she had been sick for many months, had not really talked to us about what was going on, said it was a bad arthritis, whereas it was really bone mets. But within, I guess, about 2 or 3 weeks of her dying, we were finally told what was happening. So I think it's hard to say that having a parent die that young of cancer wasn't an influence. But then in medical school, I was really, I would say, blessed to have in second year clinical skills. My clinical group leader was a hematologist named David Ginsburg, who had retired before you arrived here. But he was a phenomenal clinician and teacher, originally South African, trained in Edinburgh and Boston, and came to Kingston as a hematologist. And in those days, hematology was the only place patients with cancer went. There wasn't, in Canada anyway, a medical oncology stream. And I got really inspired by this teacher. I just thought, well, I want to be like this person when I grow up. So I decided I thought I wanted to do internal medicine and hematology, which eventually I did. And as I was doing my hematology fellowship, Joe Pater was recruited to Queen's as a hematologist. And during the first year or so of that, he became director of the Canadian Cancer Trials Group, which moved from Toronto to Queen's. So I got exposed to hematology, oncology, and clinical trials really in that period. When I finished my hematology training, during which, I mean, we ran the first cancer clinic here, the hematology team up on Angata 4 of the hospital.
Oh, really?
And the people who mixed the drugs were the trainees. I can remember being in the, I shouldn't say this, but I remember being in the kitchen on the floor of the hospital, and the treatments available this is sort of late 70s, were things like CMF for breast cancer. Adriamycin had made its presence known. And we treated the first patient in Kingston with cisplatin who had ovarian cancer. But the clerks and the residents would mix the drugs in the kitchen, getting the bubbles out, squirting it up. I mean, scary stuff by today's standards. But so I had a lot of hematology and oncology experience when I finished my training. And my husband was a family physician and was happy to move wherever I wanted to go. And I looked at a position in Hamilton. sort of for a fellowship position and in Princess Margaret doing lab research. And then Joe Pater said, we're looking for somebody who might work with the clinical trials group for a few years just to start this new drug program because we really want to.
And it was funded completely by the government at that time?
No government funding.
Oh, okay.
It was funded by the Canadian Cancer Society.
Okay.
So the clinical trials group in Canada has always got its core funding from the Canadian Cancer Society via the National Cancer Institute of Canada, which was the arm of research of the Canadian Cancer Society.
Oh,
so the NCIC in Canada was charity funded, not government funded, unlike other countries. And then, as you probably know, in the early 2000s, the Canadian Cancer Society and the NCIC merged. So it's now the Canadian Cancer Society Research Institute instead of the NCIC. That's an aside. But Joe Pater said, we really need to try to work harder to get our investigators and our patients opportunities to get new drugs for cancer. And all of the new drugs at that time, almost all, were coming through the NCI in the United States in their drug development program. But to do that efficiently, we need somebody whose job it is to go to the NCI meetings in Bethesda, to find out what drugs are in the pipeline, to put in letters of intent, to get us more organized and competitive. And so that's the position I took that was intended to be like a 2 to 3 year learning experience. But as you know, I stayed in it for 30 years or so.
Oh, and we are so grateful that you decided to do that.
It's fun. It was, and the other thing, remember what I said at the beginning about family?
Yeah.
The world of people involved in drug development that time was really tiny. Really tiny.
Yeah.
And we all got to really know each other. People like Dan von Hoff in the US. Rick Pazdur was a fellow at I think MD Anderson doing the Taxotere phase 1 or phase 2 work. And I met him because we were doing Taxotere phase 2 and we met at meetings. Martine Picard, I met through that. So many other people.
Wow.
And since then, of course, there's no way you could call cancer drug development a family anymore. It's just exploded in terms of numbers of people, numbers of companies, numbers of drugs.
No, I feel so happy just to listen to this story. It feels like I'm getting like a sneak peek into what was happening at that time without actually being there. Do you remember your first trial, like the very first trial you did?
Yes, we did. Don't even ask me what this drug did. It was a trial of acivicin, ACI.
That.
No, it never went anywhere. It was an NCI drug. We did a number of NCI. Almost all of the drug studies we did were NCI sourced drugs for about the first 2 or 3 years. And then we started to do some others. So, I mean, the first carboplatin trial in Canada was I think it was the 12th IND study we did. All of these were called IND studies and IND.
These are phase 1s.
No, we did phase 2. The phase 1 had been done. We did a phase 2 in ovarian cancer. And this was around the time Hilary Calvert, who was part of the family as well, was starting to identify novel ways of prescribing cisplatin based on.
Oh, so this is the famous Calvert from the Calvert formula to
Yeah,
calculate the
it was
dose
before that. It was, we were dosing on a milligram per meter squared basis. But we saw, as you would expect in recurrent ovarian cancer, a response rate. I think one of the early exciting studies we did came out of a lab in Canada. Not many trials did because it's complicated to go from a lab observation to getting the package together to get Health Canada approval, to formulating and figuring it out. It costs millions of dollars to do all those steps. In those days, there was a little bit less, shall we say, rigor in the oversight to the package you needed to actually propose a study and formulate a drug and so on. Anyway, there was a hematologist in.
It feels like a double-edged sword. There is more rigor as well these days, but there is also a lot more redundant bureaucracy that discourages many young investigators.
See, a lot of the rigor is necessary. I mean, you want things to be manufactured appropriately. You want them to be evaluated. And there's now internationally accepted standards for toxicology testing. There weren't in the early 1980s. But I guess the consequence of there being more rigor and more steps and more administrative aspects of new drug development is that the cost is now prohibitive for an academic to do all of this on their own. But in those days, this hematologist named James Johnston in Winnipeg was working on hairy cell leukemia, which is a pretty rare form of B-cell malignancy. Hairy cell leukemia was incurable. It was often characterized by having a massive spleen. And the only other things that caused big spleens like that were things like myelofibrosis, but a massive spleen and these funny lymphocytes that had sort of hairy projections in the peripheral blood. Interferon had very recently been shown, interferon alpha, to have activity, but it came with so much toxicity anyway. James had been working in his lab and showed that this compound, deoxycoframicin, was exquisitely active in his models in hairy cell leukemia. Anyway, long story short, we did a phase 2 trial in Canada with deoxycoframicin in hairy cell leukemia. And I put the very first patient on in Kingston by chance. I mean, it's a rare leukemia. By chance, a week after the trial opened, I got referred a patient with newly diagnosed hairy cell. And we gave him 3 weekly doses of this, and he went into complete remission.
Wow.
Like it was amazing. And that complete remission lasted for 10 years. So in that trial, the overall response rate.
Even in the pre-immunotherapy era, that used to happen.
Yes. In that trial, it was maybe 2 or 3 dozen patients. There was 100% response rate and over 80% complete. And so needless to say, we then worked with the US NCI and other groups to do a randomized trial of deoxycoframicin compared to interferon, and it was far superior. And for many years, it was the standard of care, and then that shifted and cladribine came and lots of different things happened. But I can tell you it was pretty dramatic to have a patient do so well on an investigational agent. I mean, it probably takes only one experience like that to make you very committed to doing clinical research, because you do see that the rare events are so exciting that you want to be part of more of that.
Yeah. But for some reason, it did not make you an advocate for early access to these drugs without trials. Like some people who have similar experience to what you describe, that turns them into a fierce advocate for why are we even continuing this clinical trial?
I see what you
I have
mean.
had 5 patients who have responded. This drug should be approved today.
I think that probably came from working with Joe Pater. I mean, Joe was, I think in science, you need to be curious, but also a bit skeptical. So you need to be curious and certainly excited when you observe something, but also acknowledging that there are rare, weird events that really need confirmation. So working with Joe and really the clinical trials group had a major role, or its main role was not doing early drug discovery, it was doing randomized trials. So I think it came from being part of that culture that you don't necessarily want to leap ahead into assuming things are going to be transformative on the basis of a rare observation. And it turned out that drug eventually was approved very quickly because of that work. And its use sort of fell into, I'm not sure whether it fell into disfavor, and I can't really give you the full story because other drugs came up the pipeline active in hairy cell. But it was a pretty neat story. So the first few trials we did were from NCI, and then as time went on, we started to collaborate with industry, which was always very interesting because industry was reluctant to be deeply in the oncology space in the 70s and 80s because success was so rare. And NCI was doing a great job in drug discovery. And if it ever got to the point where it looked like it was on the verge of being successful, they could do an agreement with NCI to get access to drug and data and use that route to get things into the clinic. And all of that changed, of course, when the sort of more targeted drug era began.
No, speaking of these clinical trials, I have heard different versions of this. Your famous trial that would have made you a billionaire, but you decided to
Oh,
not keep that money for yourself. So I have
yeah.
heard different versions of this. And this is another example of why I say you are such a great role model as a human being, even more than as an oncologist and trialist is. Um, you and I want to learn it from you. Like I want to get the real
Yeah.
first-hand knowledge about how this trial came about and what is the story behind our Queen's Cancer Research Institute that now I can call home. And if not for you, probably I would not have this home.
Maybe not. Who knows?
Yeah.
So one of the drugs we became interested in the late 80s, I guess, late 80s, was a drug called Taxol. That was its generic name at the time.
Oh, Taxol was the generic name.
Taxol was the generic name. Small t, Taxol, an extract from the bark of the Western yew. And it had originally been the US Department of Agriculture, which had collected samples from all sorts of native plants for NCI testing, that had identified this extract as being active in, I think it was, well, I don't know which in vitro model they used then. But it was only in the sort of 70s that it was identified that it had a unique mechanism of action. It wasn't just another vinca alkaloid. And so phase 1 trials started in the US. And a big complex molecule. I have no idea why the tree bark makes this. When you think about it, it must have an antifungal effect or something. But it
Yeah,
was
there must be.
challenging
Yeah.
to extract and formulate this. And it ended up being formulated in something called Crema-4, which helps to solubilize complex large molecules. And when they started to give it to patients, they had almost an immediate hypersensitivity type reaction. And furthermore, they got cardiac effects as well, like bradycardia or other arrhythmias. So the phase 1 investigators worked very hard to overcome these with a variety of different approaches, pre-medication, prolonged infusion, and so on. And that seemed to be helping. And meanwhile, they were seeing responses in ovary and breast cancer. So they knew that this was a drug worth salvaging if they could figure out how to use it well. And around that time, the NCI was looking for a partner to help manufacture and also do the clinical development. And they had a competitive research and development call. And I don't know how many companies responded, but Bristol Myers, later Bristol Myers Squibb, was successful in getting the so-called CRADA. And in Canada, everyone wanted to get their hands on this drug because it looked pretty exciting. It was a completely novel class of drug. So I
It was
was,
like ADC of that time.
yeah, I mean, we'd sort of exhausted platinums, we'd sort of exhausted anthracyclines, alkylating agents. And so taxanes or taxoids were
The newest.
like
Yeah.
the newest kid on the block. And so I can't remember. It was probably at a new drug development meeting. I sat with some of the people from Bristol Myers and I said, well, why can't we design a trial that actually takes advantage of a randomized design to find out how best to use this drug? And we could do that in a setting where we know it's active, which is ovarian cancer. So we designed a trial that's a bifactorial randomization between 2 doses and 2 schedules. And we pre-medicated everybody. And the reason we did the 2 schedules was then and probably now, having 24-hour infusions of cancer drugs are not trivial undertakings for a health system. We would, in those days, have had to admit patients to hospital, monitor them, all those things. So the idea of having a short outpatient infusion was appealing from a patient perspective. And we really didn't know which dose was optimal. So we did 2 doses, 2 schedules. We monitored the hypersensitivity reactions, which is our biggest fear, as and any level of hypersensitivity reaction became a reportable, immediate reportable adverse event, so we could track that. Anyway, long and short, the higher dose seemed more effective, both in terms of progression-free survival and response rate. And the shorter infusion actually was as effective, but also safer because it produced less myelosuppression.
Oh,
So less myelosuppression. So it moved people away from longer infusions to short, which was also more convenient.
yes.
So it was safer and as effective. So higher dose short infusion became kind of the standard package, which was nice. It was another clinical trial. Meanwhile, you have to remember, this is a natural product. It can't be patented. So there was no patent protection for Bristol. They had market exclusivity for a period.
I see.
But their patent team thought, wait a minute, we could patent the delivery, the methods of administration that came out of this trial as a way of gaining longer period
I
of
see.
protection. So, I mean, we had a contract with Bristol. They could, they could
Yeah.
patent anything that
Yeah.
came out. I signed on the dotted line, all that sort of thing. And then after the trial that we did in ovarian cancer, which interestingly was also the first trial we collaborated with Europe on. We had probably a dozen European centers. And that led us to collaborate a second time to do the frontline trial as an intergroup study, which showed like a 12-month gain in overall survival in ovarian cancer. So meanwhile, Taxol's on the market. A whole bunch of generic companies are eager to get a bit of this. At that time, like billion-dollar annual market for cancer drug was unheard of. So they started to, create approaches to putting a generic on the market, and were brought to a stop when they realized that there was a patent protection for the method of administration. And they wanted to challenge that patent. So they approached Queen's to say, more or less, can you help us challenge this patent? And Queen's said, what patent? Went and talked to Bristol, and they said, you should have given us some, we need to negotiate some settlement around this patent. Because at the time the trial was designed, the patents belonged to the institution.
I see.
At the time the trial finished, they belonged to the individual.
Okay.
So Queen's and Bristol negotiated a sort of $10 million US settlement. And Queen's position was that for any patents that they obtained, the inventor gets a quarter.
I see.
So $2.5 million US would come to me, and our dean at the time convinced the university that another quarter should go to the Faculty of Health Sciences. And I felt, I won't say guilty, but it felt a bit overwhelming to have the trial that we thought, wouldn't this be a cool design, turn into something that was worth that much money. And I also thought it wasn't just me, it was the whole group that did this trial together. So I decided to donate the money back to the university.
Wow. Wow.
My children, who were pretty young at the time, says, Mom, next time you have multi-million-dollar fall in your lap, please give us a quick call before you give it all away. So
the university must have been surprised too, not just your family.
It convinced them to match the donations. So what happened was I donated most of that 2.5 US million, which was at that time 3.7 Canadian million, to create a chair in clinical cancer research, which is the chair that the director of the clinical trials group holds. So in a way, I was trying to support the group that had done the trial. And then the remainder I put into a fund to build a cancer research institute, because we really needed a home for this clinical trials group. It was outgrowing all its spaces. And working with Joe Pater and Roger Dealey at the time, who was head of the biology group, we put together a proposal to create a Queen's Cancer Research Institute. And the institute is not just the building, it's the sort of the organization and the governance and the structure, which was approved by the Senate. And then we've raised funds. So in addition to my portion and the faculty's portion, we got an Ontario, I can't remember the precise organization, but there was an Ontario government grant, one time only grant opportunity for building infrastructure. We obtained that, and we got money from the Bracken family who had supported
Yeah.
Queens.
Mhm.
Anyway, we raised about $10 million in a year.
Wow. 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 That's
And
amazing.
and
Wow.
we broke ground
Uh-huh.
within sort of within a year of the approval of the institute by the Senate. We had raised enough money to break ground and build.
Wow. And Queen's Cancer Research Institute has had these 3 divisions from the very beginning?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So there was always a health services group. Bill McKillop created what initially was a health services group interested in radiation oncology research outcomes. And it was called RORU, R-O-R-U, Radiation
really?
Oncology Research Unit,
I see.
RORU. That's pretty hard, even for an Anglophone to say. And that became the division that you're
Yeah.
part,
CCE.
CCE. And then the clinical trials division was the clinical trials group, and then the biology division was the other. So we envisaged that having this sort of full spectrum of research, everything from discovery to trials to health services, all in the same home, would really facilitate collaboration. I think we were a bit naive in that. It's really hard for biologists to go to the clinical trials group and say, please study my discovery, and vice versa for the clinical trials group to go to the biologist and say, can you measure, serum ginger ale in these patients for us? That doesn't seem like research to them. It's more of a service relationship. What really was important in getting the 3 divisions to collaborate strongly was having training programs that were multidisciplinary, and that was a very successful outcome as well. So there's the story.
Oh, that's a very, very fascinating story. And we are very thankful that now this is on record so that we have the correct version of the story.
A version of the
Yeah.
story. I didn't tell you about being deposed by 12 lawyers from all these other companies.
Really?
It was very stressful. Well, they wanted to break the patent,
Yeah.
and the patent in the end, I think, didn't hold up years later. But they really wanted to find cracks in the patent that they could use to challenge it successfully. And I had no, I would say, overwhelming sense of ownership of this discovery. To me, it was an idea we did a trial around. It was very interesting to be on the receiving end of a deposition and to be, I think it went on for 4 or 5 days, these 12 lawyers. And then I had the Queen's lawyer and Bristol had their lawyer. And
Which reminds me, why didn't you patent RECIST criteria? You are the lead author of the RECIST criteria.
it came
Because
up.
you could have made money from every trial.
Yeah.
No, in a sense, I asked this because the quality of life tools,
Yeah,
I think.
no, and that came up. Where did it come up? It came up, years ago when EORTC, which actually has, I don't know whether it's called a patent of the quality of life, but they certainly charge a fee for the use of the quality of life instruments, and that allows them to recoup the costs of the development and the testing and give them money for other projects as well. And somebody said, well, we should have done that with RECIST, charged a fee for the use of the RECIST criteria. The group that put together the first RECIST criteria came from NCI, the Canadian Trials Group, the European group. And I think we were just really more interested in standardizing what we saw as a flawed tumor measurement system, not in using it to gain wealth. And I'm not sure if the NCI was involved anyway. There would have been the ability to do that.
Was it very difficult to get people's consensus on the RECIST group? Like I asked because nowadays, as you know, we have been working on the RCT checklist through Common Sense Oncology, and we are, we're trying to convince the stakeholders that they should be using this. But when you first developed, or you or the team developed RECIST, how difficult was it to convince people to start using RECIST?
It wasn't that hard, but part of our development was, so everyone had been using response criteria before. It wasn't like we were saying, this is something new that you have to start doing.
They were using the WHO criteria.
They were using WHO or modifications of it. And the problem that led to the creation of the RECIST criteria was that there were so many modifications of the WHO that we weren't really talking the same language anymore. And at that same time, one of the colleagues working here, a man named Keith James, had been promoting this idea of using unidimensional measurements of tumors instead of bidimensional measures. And so we thought, well, if we're going to be looking at response criteria, why don't we, and we put together a data warehouse of tumor measurements from trials, why don't we evaluate whether one dimension is as good as, and it was, and that was.
It is easier.
It was easier.
Yeah.
So the context was everyone was using response criteria, that it was really a multi-group effort to produce this. Furthermore, we had wide distribution of drafts to industry, to other groups, to key opinion leaders. Like, it went everywhere. And we went through 2 or 3 iterations of that before we finalized them. Then we presented them at international meetings. And at least from the NCI's perspective, all its trials were going to use these new criteria. And so it started to be picked up pretty quickly because the users largely developed or approved it. And everyone agreed it would be simpler. So those were 2 important things.
Now, do you feel like it has been misused?
I don't think so. I think there were a lot of people very caught up in the precision of measurement. So you have to remember that the RECIST criteria were a way of describing results of a trial, largely intended for phase 2, early phase development, that would be reproducible across various centers, but also that would give you the answer of whether drug A or drug B had enough evidence of activity you wanted to continue to study it. So having extremely precise measurements were as important as having a clear way of documenting what you've done and describing the outcome. So the fact that within a trial, if you could do 3D measurements, you might come up with a slightly different response rate, wasn't to me as interesting as whether if you did things slightly differently, a drug would go from being potentially useful to useless. And so it was the totality of the trial results, not the individual response, that was really the goal of RECIST, was to help us make decisions about drugs with the trial as a unit, as opposed to necessarily the patient as a unit. That being said, some places, I mean, the Netherlands, colleagues there, they use RECIST in daily practice to make decisions.
Oh, really?
To make decisions about
clinical decisions,
which is pretty unusual. Lots of places don't do that. We don't do that here in Canada, or in my experience. We will integrate what we're seeing on scans and the measurements with what's happening to the patient. And, if we're unsure.
It never felt like a clinical criteria to me.
No, but I think the other reason, of course, they may have done that is to get their radiologists used to just always providing tumor measurements. So then a trial is not more work, it's standard.
I see.
So I'm not sure if that's really the motivation, but they do use it a bit differently.
No, the misuse I was alluding to is about using response and PFS for drug approval and funding decisions now. Because the original intent, as you mentioned, was no-go decision from phase 2 to phase 3. But for all these approval and reimbursement and funding decisions based on.
No, there's something interesting in the way we as a collective like to make things simple. And if there is a measurement for something, we tend to try to give it some meaning. So it isn't just in RECIST, but so we can measure something, call it PD, based on a criteria that we more or less made up, and then suddenly the number of cases of PD or the time to get to PD is therefore meaningful because we can measure it. It reminds me a bit, and I don't want to get into an area that I don't have the expertise, but it's not unlike what happens with other measures of potential risk factors in medicine. How dense or not dense are your bones? And if you cross a line, you have an illness that needs a treatment. Whereas really it's a risk factor. The same with hypertension. It's a risk factor. Occasionally it is clearly makes you sick, but
Okay.
it's mostly treated as a risk factor
Yeah.
for other diseases. And suddenly, if you change the definition,
Exactly.
you have a disease that
Yeah.
you didn't have last month before the definition
Yeah.
changed. So we do like to give meaning to things that we can measure, but the measurement points are often not based on the outcomes.
Mhm.
They're based on just convenience
Mhm.
or arbitrariness or what seems to make common sense. And this whole idea in RECIST that we used, a 20% increase in unidimensional sum as PD, we could have chosen 25 or 30 or 15.
Yeah. True. Yeah.
We chose 20 because it seemed reasonable. It was not what WHO was 12.5% increase in unidimensional measurement.
Oh, okay.
If you do the math
I see.
backwards.
I see.
So it was more than WHO, but less than, so it just seemed like if that was happening, probably the treatment wasn't working and it would be worth stopping. And that's really where that thinking was.
Oh, it did. No, it's very fascinating. And you have given us some lectures about your whole journey. We are also nearing towards the end of the podcast. But from all that RECIST development to clinical trial to now as a part of Common Sense Oncology, uh, this whole career sort of transition for you towards policy and advocacy.
Yes, yeah. Well, along
Mhm.
my career path, I became president of the National Cancer Institute of Canada, which, of course, as the research partner to the Canadian Cancer Society, was at the table around discussions around the creation, for example, of a Canadian cancer control strategy. So I became involved in that. I became part of what became the Canadian Cancer Research Alliance, which was an alliance of cancer research funders. Became part of the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer, which was the implementation arm of the Canadian Cancer Control Strategy. So I became more interested in cancer control. I also, realistically, in daily practice, the observations are that it is plausible that we will never be able to cure all cancers. So if we really want to do the maximum good, maybe we should also be thinking about how to prevent them in the first place. And if that is not possible, how to make the suffering people endure as bearable as possible so that prevention and palliation became important to me personally, even though they weren't in my wheelhouse as a new drug developer. I became very interested in what we should be doing as research influencers, if that's the right word, in promoting implementation of policy and creation of research opportunities to prevent cancers. And that got me interested in tobacco endgame. And as you know, we held a national summit here at Queen's to develop an endgame strategy for Canada for tobacco. And that was really, I would say, fulfilling in a way, because it helped scratch the itch I had about the myth that we can treat our way out of the cancer problem. We have to be more, we have to think more broadly than a treatment paradigm.
And no, towards the end, I would also like to get this opportunity to ask you what advice you have for me. And by me, I don't mean just me, but I'm representing all young, new oncologists who look up to you as a role model, who wants to build a fulfilling career, but also balancing the personal lives.
Yeah.
Because you have shown us that it is possible to have a good, fulfilling personal life, a good, satisfying and successful professional career, and to do good at the end, to leave Earth better than what you found it. So how to achieve all of that?
Yeah, well, I think if there were a formula, we would all know it, wouldn't we? I think a lot of what happened to me was happenstance. I could have not come to Queen's. I got a bigger scholarship at Western. I could have not met David Ginsburg. I could have not chosen hematology. Respirology was something I was interested in because of my own asthma.
Yeah.
So partly it is to, I guess the advice is to acknowledge that things will come to you or around you that you can either choose to embrace or ignore. To know what you really gives you meaning. I think it all comes down to people's happiness depends, yes, on a basic level of physical comfort and food and shelter, but also to feel like you are engaged in something that's meaningful and gives you purpose. And to recognize that that's not something a checklist will give you of do this, go there, be that. It's something you have to find in yourself. So finding the meaning. And I would also say never hesitate to try to give back. And you do that. You've given back in many ways to your home country with the
Try to.
yeah. So so find the thing that gives you meaning. Work hard. Surround yourself with people you care about and that care about you, and give back would be my. They're not very prescriptive. It's not like choose to do an MD, PhD, and you will be happy. That I don't think that's.
In your eyes, what would an ideal mentee be like, and what would an ideal mentor be like?
Oh, ideal mentee. I think the best mentees I've had are ones that find their way to your office, even if you might be busy, who kind of want to come in, who want to make time with you, who challenge you, who have ideas that you need to respond to. So the difficult mentee is one who sits waiting for stuff to happen to them. So I think the ideal mentee really works to make the opportunity as successful as possible. The ideal mentor is somebody who maybe should listen more than talk. I don't know. And who is willing to get out of kind of a rigid view of what someone should be doing and listen to where their interests are. And it may be that the mentor, if they're really a wise person, will say, well, you know what, you need to be working with so-and-so, not me, because they have exactly what you need to achieve your goals. So those are just a few things.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Okay.
And thank you for making time today.
You're very welcome.
In this snowy winter.
It's very snowy.
It's very slippery as well outside.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
So
want us to walk with care.
yeah, we really appreciate you making time for this. I know that nowadays you don't travel as often as like people like Ian Tannock do. So
Yeah,
people don't get to hear from you, like people across the world. So I hope that this is an opportunity for people across the world to learn from you, to get inspired from you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Bishav.